I do, however, adore my wife. She is amazing, a wonderful mother. The children are content and in good health. There's nothing more than that, of course. At one point, Richard Gere was everything that Hollywood wanted: defiant, sensual, menacing, and handsome. After just one performance in American Gigolo, where he stripped it all to play an elite escort, he became a timeless sex icon, made millions with just a smile, and enthralled the world in Pretty Woman. He was the epitome of lust, calm detachment, attention, and stardom. Richard Gere was more than just a celebrity for more than 20 years. He was the epitome of masculinity. Then he disappeared. No more high profile positions, no scandals, no goodbye speeches. People just realized one day that he had departed America and Hollywood. The most startling question was not just why he went, but also whether he took anything with him or nothing at all. Richard Gere had a remarkable real estate business that stretched across the United States for many years. From luxurious apartments in the center of Manhattan to expansive estates in the suburbs of New York and a magnificent home in Connecticut. Wineries, guest homes, horse stables, private forests, and artificial rock streams. He sold it everything after living like a contemporary American aristocrat. No warning, no lengthy justification. After being born in America, where he was once wooed by Hollywood and had everything to himself, Richard Gere left the nation. Nobody knew why. A man who had amassed more than $120 million at the height of his renown gave it all up to start again in an unexpected place. He didn't purchase a boat. He didn't start a business. He never relocated to California. He disappeared from the map of show business. Where does he currently reside? Where does he currently reside? Why did he go? For what reason did he abandon the superstar game? And what, after all, is he clinging to? What is he secretly hiding that not many people are aware of? And why is it so different from what you think a Hollywood celebrity would be like? But we must go back to the beginning to comprehend why Richard Gere left America. The limelight, millions of dollars in property, and everything else behind. It's not Hollywood, but a quiet boy in a tiny village once thought that philosophy and music might save the world. On August 31, 1949, Richard Gere was born in a quiet village close to Syracuse, New York. No one in his family was involved in the arts, and his family wasn't very affluent. His mother was a housewife, and his father sold insurance. The humble house was steeped with humanism, discipline, and music. Discipline and music. A setting that fostered an introspective, reflective Richard Gere who was constantly a little out of step with the masses. Acting was not his first career. He excelled in gymnastics, practiced hard, and played the trumpet in high school. He was awarded a scholarship to study philosophy and theater at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 1967. It was a strange combination, but it hinted at a road that was unmatched. He left school after 2 years because he didn't need a degree to live in accordance with who he was, not because he was frustrated. After dropping out of school, Richard Gere immersed himself in small-scale theater plays in New York and Seattle. Yeah, he played unnamed supporting parts, endured innumerable auditions, and lived with the silent hope that one day even silence would be heard. His portrayal of a death row inmate in The Killer's Mind in 1975 marked the first significant development, a blindfolded character that relied only on his voice freely. But his best weapon was exposed by that very restriction, a presence that came from within him rather than from his physical appearance. He then gradually progressed through parts in Yanks' Days of Heaven and Looking for Mr. Goodbar. When John Travolta declined a dangerous and provocative job, however, the true door opened and it fell into Richard Gere's hands. It was 1980. An American Gigolo was the movie. Gere was no longer a potential actor from the first time he stepped onto the screen, nude, unrepentant, and playing the role of a luxury escort. He rose to fame. An embodiment of subtle sensuality, quiet passion, and the modern man who doesn't have to shout to get attention. Richard Gere became more than simply a worldwide sex icon thanks to American Gigolo. It signaled the start of a period in which everything he came into contact with became famous. He starred in An Officer and a Gentleman, a seemingly simple military romance that became a global hit 2 years later, with a box office total of around $130 million and several Oscar nominations, Gere established himself as a crucial representative of 1980s Hollywood. Richard Gere, however, took a different route. Igla. He chose to perform Bent, a daring theater piece about homosexual prisoners in Nazi extermination camps, rather than reciting the ideal of the perfect gentleman. In addition to winning him the Theatre World Award, the part demonstrated that Richard Gere wasn't playing to get favor. He was playing to see what he could do. He then delved into roles of moral tension and internal anguish. He portrayed a dishonest police officer in Internal Affairs, 1990. In Primal Fear, 1996, he battled a cunning adolescent criminal, which helped make Edward Norton famous. In the 1997 action film The Jackal, he played an Irish-accented ex-era soldier who faced battle against Bruce Willis. However, if there is a one film that made Richard Gere a household name, it is Pretty Woman, 1990, a movie he didn't want to take at first. It was too reckless and too corny of a script. He didn't say yes until he saw Julia Roberts and noticed that inexplicable chemistry. As a consequence, $463 million was made worldwide on a budget of $14 million. A cultural phenomenon emerged, and Richard Gere became one of Hollywood's everlasting gentlemen. He continuously achieved success in the 1990s with films that struck a mix between profundity and popular appeal. Summersby, First Night, Red Corner, Runaway, Bride, Show. From $2 million to $5 million and eventually $13 million per film, his salary increased gradually. He played lawyer Billy Flynn in the dark musical Chicago, which marked the height of his career in the early 2000s. He received a Golden Globe for the part, which also thrust him back into the public eye. Not with appearances, but with depth, talent, and the refinement of decades of practice. Hundreds of millions at the box office, more than 50 films, and scores of unforgettable performances. The oddest thing, though, is that Richard Gere never received an Oscar nomination, despite the fact that many people think he should have. From Days of Heaven to Arbitrage, he portrayed a businessman who was losing his morals and money. Maybe he decided to leave for that reason as well. A career that was comprehensive enough to end with a head held high, yet didn't require a golden statue to demonstrate its value. Richard Gere's net worth once reached $120 million, and he made millions of dollars every film at the height of his career. However, in contrast to many of his peers who lavished money on private planes, yachts, and mansions in the Beverly Hills, he quietly established a very other kind of empire. He bought an old inn in New York State and converted it into the Bedford Post Inn, a boutique hotel with 8 rooms tucked away in the woods where visitors may meditate, do yoga, and eat entirely organic food. No VIP lounges, no bars, no EDM music, just quiet and deep, contemplative breathing. It was not a commercial endeavor, it was a declaration about life. Gere collaborated with Tenuta Sanfilippo to create Brunello di Montalcino, one of Italy's most esteemed wines in Tuscany, Italy, where he once walked for a full afternoon just to listen to the wind and the clinking of wine glasses, under the title of Bedford Post. These bottles have a hint of loneliness, a sweet aftertaste, and a deep tannin. He once remarked, "I can't imagine a meal without wine," not because he was addicted, but rather because he views wine as a component of a slow, deliberate sensory rhythm. Richard Gere is in his 70s and has no time management skills. He routinely joins his wife in environmental, educational, and humanitarian endeavors, plays with his young children, meditates every morning, and takes walks in gardens. Although he doesn't have a strict routine, his life is clearly structured, always filled but not bustling. It's also important to note this. He made the decision to live that way while he was still extremely wealthy, well-known, and capable of filming 10 more movies if he so desired. His quiet lifestyle is what causes people to take a step back and view him in a different light. A man who chose to live as a true human being rather than becoming a Hollywood product. When a man decides to live simply in the midst of millions of wealth, it's obvious that he has more than enough and doesn't lack anything. Richard Gere has had a real estate map for more than 30 years that any A-list celebrity would be envious of. There was a commonality among the lands he purchased, occupied, renovated, and ultimately abandoned. They served as much than just shelters. They reflected a philosophy of life. Richard Gere spent $1.05 million buying a property in Pound Ridge, New York in 1987, just as his career was taking off. Not Malibu or Beverly Hills, but a completely isolated village about an hour's drive from Manhattan. He subtly increased its size over the years by purchasing nearby parcels, constructing 5 more guest cottages, and remodeling the 11,600 square foot main house with 9 fireplaces, ponds, horse stables, and private riding routes. Over 50 acres made up the estate, which resembled a private nature preserve where he spent more than 30 years living in seclusion from the press, Hollywood, and the commotion he had formerly been a part of. Then he sold it in 2022. Cost $28 million. Wills million. A high figure. The way he left, however, shocked the people more. Just a silent listing and a silent transaction. No images, no statement, no farewell. A few months later, he bought a historic mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, that had belonged to Eddie Bickle and Paul Simon, 2 legendary musicians. The 31-acre property featured an 11-bedroom main home with 6 bedrooms, a separate guest house with 3 bedrooms, an old forest, waterfalls, rock streams, a fish pond, an outdoor pool, and woodland pathways. Nestled in the center of America lies a house with traditional English charm. Richard Gere, however, had more in mind than simply surviving. A vision came to him. In order to create a self-sufficient model where he could live, produce, and raise his children in balance with the land, nature, and roots, he presented proposals to the newly established Canaan Planning Commission to turn 27 acres into an agricultural farm that would grow mushrooms, raise bees, and maybe raise dairy goats. Then, only 2 years later, in 2024, he sold it once more. Cost of $10.75 million, almost breaking even. The farm project was canceled. Everything was swiftly listed and moved in a covert manner. Nobody was aware of the reason. No failure, no controversy, and no public justification. Just one fact: he departed from the US. His destination was Alconadas, a peaceful suburb north of Madrid in Spain, not London or Provence. Richard Gere bought a villa there for 11 million euros, which included a 34-acre property, a large garden, horse stables, and a private wine cellar, enough to keep his 2 young sons from ever reaching a fence during their lunchtime run. Just wind, trees, Spanish accents, and his wife's relatives close by. No fountains, no sports cars, no round-the-clock security. He told Vanity Fair Spain, "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world. I believe it's time for me to move into her home." In his 70s, Richard Gere disappeared from the United States, where he had once achieved success and had all he needed to start over in a different nation, living in a house that no one could take pictures of, and leading an unstructured existence. Nevertheless, he retained a few locations for potential future visits, such as the Southampton home that he first acquired for $6.5 million and then sold for an incredible $36 million, or the apartment in Gramercy Park, New York, that he bought for more than $2 million in 2016 after receiving advice from Jimmy Fallon. He spent 20 years living in another older apartment, which is being rented out for $20,000 per month. Like a discreetly commercialized corner of recollection, it demonstrates that Richard Gere was able to stay in America. He just decided not to take it with him. The story goes beyond the living areas. His lifestyle is also reflected in the things he decides to drive, own, and part with. Richard Gere does not have any gaudy million-dollar supercars in his garage. However, there is the meticulous selection of a person who appreciates traditional beauty. The Jaguar I-Pace, which Enzo Ferrari referred to as the most beautiful car in the world, was previously owned by him. A Mercedes-Benz Roan 107, an elegant coupe from the 1970s that represents durability and sophistication. Gere was a driver of a 2015 Jaguar XK as well. Like himself, it has a sleek exterior, a wood-trimmed interior, and a strong yet modest V8 engine. Notably, he owned a 2004 Lotus Esprit, a little, sensual, low-slung automobile that was a rare joy he never required anyone to witness. They weren't props for magazine photo shoots. They were all actual cars, and he never hesitated to say goodbye when it was time. Richard Gere raised $31,000 for war victims in Ukraine in 2023 by auctioning off his 1999 Jaguar XK convertible. A straightforward move that demonstrates his expenditures without the use of a campaign, media, or hashtags. Ends media. However, Richard Gere's most valuable possession is not a map and cannot be valued in monetary terms. He has subtly accumulated and safeguarded this type of cultural and symbolic richness for many years. In the face of globalization and political pressure from China, he is the chairman of the board of several nonprofit groups that support religious freedom, healthcare, education, and the preservation of Tibetan culture, including the Gere Foundation, Tibet House US, and the International Campaign for Tibet. Due to his excessively political views, he has been barred from big Hollywood blockbusters and banned from China for good. He hasn't given up, though. He hasn't changed his position. He hasn't shown regret. In addition, Gere has previously established an HIV/AIDS charity in India that provides medical facilities for women and children afflicted by the disease and supports Survival International, an organization that defends endangered indigenous tribes. There are Tibetan Buddhist paintings, antique statues, and handwritten scripture scrolls in his study instead of trophies. These are items that no one would identify or bid on, but to him, they are priceless. Although their market value doesn't increase, their value does based on his lifestyle choices. Richard Gere can make an impression without his fortune. However, every piece of property he purchased, every home he constructed, every bottle of wine he made, every vehicle he owned, and every group he covertly supported all point to the same conclusion. He never turned down money. He just made the decision to be wealthy in a manner that Hollywood could never replicate. He swapped land, sold his home, and made lifestyle changes. However, it wasn't real estate, politics, or even age that caused the biggest change in Richard Gere's life. It originated with a woman and the little kids who now refer to him as Dad. In a Madrid garden, Richard Gere is arranging flowers with his 4-year-old son at a time when many Hollywood celebrities choose to live alone behind the walls of their past greatness. For those who used to know him as the icy, alluring lover on TV, this scene was one of such tranquility and surprise. His current wife, Alexandra Silva, is a Spanish social activist and the daughter of Ignacio Silva, the former vice president of Real Madrid. Alejandra, who was born into a wealthy family and grew up surrounded by media, politics, and football, decided to lead a quiet life and focus on helping others. In 2018, they tied the knot in a modest ceremony in New York, where two completely different cultures came together to find a place where they both belonged rather than for attention. In 2019, at the age of 70, Richard Gere gave birth to his first child with Alejandra, a son named Alexander Asunder. In 2020, they welcomed a second son, whose name is still unknown. He may be a late father, but his love is never late. Richard Gere, who used to be renowned for his independence and introspection, now spends the most of his time at home, playing with his 2 young sons, taking walks with them, sharing tales with them, and attending all of their meals. No help, no 247 nannies, and no job separation between mom and dad. He's a priest practice. He contributes to their childhood through gifts rather than cash. He once made a really basic statement: happy life, happy wife. He left America to be with his wife. He sold the land he had owned for 35 years for his wife. He changed residences, time zones, and his notion of success for his wife, and he also learned Spanish. Richard Gere formally relocated his family to Spain in 2024 after selling all of his U.S. holdings. They now reside full-time in a medieval villa in Alcoanes, which is north of Madrid. It is now a place to start again as a regular guy, not merely a haven of refuge or a second home. My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world, he said to Vanity Fair Spain. It's time for me to move into her home now. However, Richard Gere doesn't live for pleasure alone. He works with Hogarth, a nonprofit organization that aims to eradicate homelessness in Spain in 5 years alongside Alejandra. They also back Sierra Omar, a sustainable coastline restoration initiative in Mexico, where he invests, watches, and makes a difference instead of giving lectures. His family hosted 35 relatives for Christmas at their El Conte's house at the end of 2024. Richard was the one who urged his wife to continue being the center of the family when Alejandra's grandma died. She hosted Sunday meals and set the table for 3 generations. He no longer views success as being able to attend red carpet premieres, earn million-dollar salaries, or appear in a blockbuster. It is a house full of children's laughing instead, a wife who really gets him, a peaceful sunlit morning without the need for an alarm. What's even more amazing is that he has 3 children, each born in a totally different stage of his life. Richard Gere nurtured his quiet small son, Homer, with his ex-wife Carrie Lell through the divorce and the years that followed. Homer was born in 2000. Homer stays close to his father in spite of the turmoil. He frequently visits the new family and backs Gere's charitable endeavors. With Alexander and the younger kid, Richard Gere accepted fatherhood with the tact of an experienced person, free from the weight of his work or notoriety. He doesn't have to be the perfect example. All he has to do is remain there long enough and near enough. Most likely, you wouldn't anticipate it. Once exposing himself on TV to play a wealthy escort, the man now leads a simple life, practices morning meditation, and takes care of his own backyard garden. Richard Gere, meanwhile, has always seen everything as a shedding process. Well, he started Zen meditation in his 20s, studied under Zen master Kyozen Jhu Sasaki, and then visited Tibetan monks in Nepal. He previously received initiation from the Dalai Lama himself and became a Gelugpa Buddhist. He entered the world with a calmer, more determined demeanor as a result of his belief rather than withdrawing into a monastery. Stop treating yourself like an afterthought. Eat delicious food. Walk in the sunshine. Jump in the ocean. Be silly. Be kind. Be weird. Be weird. There's no time for anything else, he once said. This isn't just a catchphrase. It's a philosophy that guides his eating habits, his lifestyle, and even his refusal of roles. Gere has purposefully avoided blockbuster films, refused formulaic screenplays, and eschewed the sexualization of middle-aged men for the past 20 years, instead embracing introspective parts in films such as Arbitrage, Norman, Time Out of Mind, The Benefactor, Quiet. Thoughtful performances that aren't box office hits but have a purpose. He believes that calm is the power of our chaotic times, which is why his passion project, the Bedford Post in New York, isn't a place for showing off. In real life, he chooses to live slowly, eats organic, does yoga, grows his own vegetables, pours his own wine, and never uses his phone while speaking to someone. He commissioned a unique Brunello de Montalcino under the Bedford Post label from Italy, a wine rich in depth offered at many of the charity events he attended. It has only 8 rooms, no bar, no EDM, no VIP zones, just yoga, artisan wine, and a slow enough beat to hear your own thoughts. He has no private jet, yacht, startup, or fashion brand like other actors of his generation, but he has kept a clear head, enough kindness, and decisions that don't require an explanation. In a time when visibility is often confused with fame, Richard Gere has chosen to disappear simply to be himself. Not for mass sale, but for sharing, gifting, and sipping with an old friend on a calm afternoon. Richard Gere once said, "Stop treating yourself like an afterthought." He has lived his life in this manner, not to make a statement, but to be fully present for what really counts. He no longer needs the big part or an Oscar, but he has a wealth that no spreadsheet can quantify, including a tranquil home with his wife and kids, a historic estate in Madrid, and the villas he once built and abandoned. Though he has an estimated net worth of over $120 million, a wine that bears his name, a meditative inn without a bar, and a full but never extravagant life, perhaps the greatest thing he owns is the right to live as a real human being, not a retreat, but a return. And perhaps, once all the glitter has faded, Richard Gere is just revealing one truth to us. What do you think of Richard Gere's decision? Would you trade fame for peace the way he did? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Also, remember to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any more heartwarming tales like this one. When you no longer want to be seen, that's when you're finally seen the clearest.